The Wacky Rig. It's got a great name, and even better, it catches fish. What makes the Wacky Rig so deadly is the very subtle movement that this soft plastic makes as it falls through the water column. These salt-impregnated soft plastics are just a little bit denser than water, so they will sink very, very slowly, which means as you cast out and do that slackline fall where you're just letting it sink to the bottom unassisted, usually those bass who are staged in the middle of the water column will strike at this. We have a 5-inch Senko. This is the universal Wacky Rig stick bait. This one is a watermelon seed with a chartreuse tail. I found that color combination really allows to fish just about any conditions, from kind of tannic and darker water like you'll see behind me here, to very clear water. That is going to be rigged with a #1 finesse hook tied to a fluorocarbon leader. And then we have a 15-pound braid. You can go lighter than that depending on where you're fishing. This tends to be my standard though, is about that 15-pound mark. You can also use weights. You can use jig heads. All of those will present differently in the water. Faster drops if you're fishing in areas that have more water current, or if you simply want to get down to the bottom. This works well when you're fishing highly pressured areas, such as busy weekends, or when the fish are not feeling particularly active. This could be when they're on their beds, pre-spawn, during spawn, even post-spawn, as well as when it starts to get warm out. I'm not sure if you can tell right now because it's overcast, but here in North Carolina, summer's begun. It's gonna get up into 90 today, and as a result, these fish are not spending a lot of time moving. They're gonna stay in their holes, they're gonna stay where it's dark and cool, and ambush whatever looks good. And in this case, it's gonna be a Wacky Rig Senko.
Now, let's go over how to rig a Wacky Rig and the different pieces of hardware that you may need depending on how you choose to rig it. First off, we're going to talk about our main line, which in this case is a 15-pound spider wire braid. While one of the preferred methods is fluorocarbon, fluorocarbon is a little on the expensive side. So to negate that, we're going to be using everyone's favorite braided line. In this case, I like to use a swivel to attach my main line to my leader. If you were using fluorocarbon or even monofilament, you could just tie straight to the hook, but you're just gonna have to bear with me on this one for a few minutes. Fisherman's knot. Now we're going to attach a lightweight fluorocarbon leader. This again, I'm going very lightweight because I'm not fishing around a lot of cover or expecting particularly large bass. The fluorocarbon is useful with these finesse rigs because it is a little bit denser than water, and as such, it sinks, requiring less weight to get your bait down and a more natural presentation. Trim that end up too. Now we've got our very, very thin leader. This is a little bit long, but it's kind of just for exaggeration. You can usually tie about a foot of leader material. But before we tie our hooks on, I'm gonna go over the types of hooks that we have here. So I have a octopus or finesse style hook right here. This one's actually a circle hook, which I have also used to great effect with my Wacky Rigs. I do have a jig head if you want to rapidly get that bait down to the bottom. If you want a little bit slower, you can always clip on a split shot. That's another reason I like having that leader, is it allows me to add weight to it and it's not going to slide around. We also have just your standard J hook. This is a little bit more helpful if you're doing a slightly embedded weedless style rigging technique, like you can kind of see here. And then we have a true weedless style rig. This one has a stout monofilament that's been secured just below the eye. And what that's gonna do is keep your light grasses from getting hung up on that point. And then we also have a couple of specialty rigging tools here. This is a Wacky Rig O-ring. This is gonna work by sliding onto your stick bait, and then you can run the hook through that second gap. This is gonna give you a lot more life in your plastic, because if you get a couple of bites, it's very quickly gonna develop holes, as you can see. And while an extra pack of soft plastics is not terribly expensive, it is gonna slow you down and it's gonna be an added cost. This allows you to really quickly change out your colors, change out your hooks. It's a really great system. You can also very quickly adjust where this is, so that if you wanted kind of an offset action as it was falling through the water like this, you could do that. I also have a Nico or Neko weight. This is a nail style weight. If you really had to, you could actually just use a nail. But what this does is it's inserted into the nose end of your stick bait or your Senko, and it's going to cause this to sit on the bottom, kind of like a Ned rig or a jig. You're still going to be hooking it through the center, so that as it's moving through the water, it has a vertical presentation to it.
Now we've got our Wacky Rigs tied up. It's time to see how they're gonna function in the water.
The first contender, the Nico rigged Senko, tied to a fluorocarbon 18-inch leader on 15-pound braid. Now, the Senko still falls to the bottom. However, you'll notice it does fall head or weight first, and much faster than the unrigged Senko or unweighted Senko.
Here is our O-ring style Wacky Rigged Senko. Let's see how that fishes.
So the O-ring allows this bait to fall hook first and with a very, very subtle action to it. If we wanted to increase that drop or action, we can always add a split shot or even a jig head.
Up next, we have the through-hooked weedless Senko. This is, of course, the larger of the three that I was showing earlier.
While these tests are certainly not scientific, you can see that because the classic through-hook style has literally punctured the middle of the Senko, it has a lot more of a pronounced fold to it. If you're going for an absolute minimum or minimal profile rig, I would probably recommend going with a through hook.
A finesse rig, which means you're fishing light gear, light line, small hooks for subtle presentations. I am fishing on a St. Croix Triumph 7-foot spinning rod. This is a medium fast, so it gives plenty of sensitivity up here at the top and gives me a lot of reach to cast those light baits even further. That's being paired with a Shimano FX 2500. Something in that 2000 to 2500 range works perfectly for this finesse. You can hold a lot of line on there. Gear ratios are good. Those fish are making it very hard to talk while I'm doing this. But its gears are also set slow enough that you're not taking in a ton of line and you're allowing that bait to move very, very subtly across the bottom. Watching our line, because this is a slack line fall. It is slowly falling. We're watching that line come closer together. And when it hits the bottom, I'm just gonna give it that pop and a couple of cranks. Let it sink again. And this is a finesse, slow speed technique. You do not need to rush your retrieves. The entire basin here is lined with these fallen logs. So there's a tremendous amount of cover down here for these bass to hide in and cruise over. If you did want this to get down to the bottom faster, or there was a little bit of wind or current, you could always clip a split shot onto the leader and get that bait falling a bit faster. When you do that, it's going to increase the action that your rig has because it's moving faster through the water. Just like if you put your hand in the water when you were walking in the pond or the pool, if you were running really fast, you'd feel that drag. On more than one occasion, I have caught bass at my feet with a Wacky Rig, just letting it fall and kind of admiring how it moves through the water. Now, I am using spinning gear for this. However, if you had a favorite bait caster, you could easily fish with a very, very light setting on your bait caster as well. When fishing this style, especially on a slackline, it is important to do a sweeping hook set. When you watch that line start to move in the other direction, pick up speed in the fall, you're going to simply bring it up. Kind of a reel through. Because of the way that that hook is positioned, you're usually going to hook them in the top of the mouth, but if you really crank it back with a fast hook set, you run the risk of just pulling it out of their mouth. And when you pair that with such light line that you're using here, the possibility of sending a bass home with a lip ring is very, very high. All right, so we're gonna try casting into this timber over here. This is not currently set up weedless style, so we do need to be cognizant of how deep we're putting this into cover. Hey, it's a dink, but it counts, right? Well, as with every fisherman, I caught one here, so I'm gonna try that again. And that was what I was talking about with, you never want to drag that rig in too quickly. That fish struck in about 7 feet in front of me. Wasn't huge by any stretch of the imagination, but it shows you that that's where they come from. Any direction, at any period. They could be following for a while, and something that you do, that pause, could be enough. Another very useful time when a lot of pro bass anglers will use a Wacky Rig is when they're fishing a topwater bait, like a frog, and they'll have this rig right next to them. And when you have a blow up and a missed strike, if you can put this Wacky Rig right in that same spot, that fish that is fired up and aggressive and looking for a meal will see this crippled looking bait floating down past them and will usually draw a reaction strike. It's a great way to lose friends if you're fishing with someone else too.